There we see a wreck, and there we see something there. And then this thing popping up on the screen.
Or they head back to Stockholm to get a new side-scan sonar. Both of these alternatives will cost time and money.
For 14 years, scientists couldn't explain it. Divers who touched it came up shaken. Equipment failed every time researchers got close. The theories kept coming, and every single one collapsed under the evidence. A 60-meter disc-shaped object has been sitting 90 meters beneath the Baltic Sea, bearing geometry that nature cannot produce. Surrounded by a 300-meter scar the ocean refused to erase, actively killing electronics within 200 meters of its center. Nobody could agree on what it was. Nobody could get close enough to prove anything. But that changes today. After years of questions, the Baltic Sea anomaly mystery is finally solved, and the answer that researchers have landed on is stranger, darker, and more unsettling than any theory that came before it. Once you understand what this object actually is, you won't look at the ocean floor the same way again. The shape that shouldn't exist, Ocean X, made its money finding shipwrecks. Centuries of Baltic naval warfare had left the seafloor carpeted with sunken hulls and scattered cargo. A solid sonar return almost always meant another wooden wreck, another payday. Peter Lindbergh and his partner Dennis Osberg had been running these sweeps for years. They knew what a shipwreck looked like on a monitor. They knew what a rock formation looked like. They knew what an anchor pile, a collapsed hull, a reef, and a sand drift looked like. What appeared on Lindbergh's monitor that afternoon looked like none of those things. The side-scan sonar was rendering a round, massive, disc-shaped object with edges that were not eroded. They were sharp, geometrically sharp. Lines too clean, too precise, too deliberate for anything the ocean could carve on its own. The object spanned roughly 60 meters in diameter and sat pressed against the seabed at a depth of 90 meters. Dark, scorch-like patches covered its surface in irregular patterns. Strange markings followed contours that bore no resemblance to anything the crew had encountered in years of Baltic exploration. Along its edges, the sonar picked up angular geometric features that looked almost engineered. Almost. Because Lindbergh was not ready to use that word yet. He would avoid it for months. Osberg later described the moment as the point where the expedition shifted from treasure hunting to something none of them had a name for. He remembered that Lindbergh stayed very quiet, didn't say anything dramatic, just ran the scan a third time, then a fourth, stared at the monitor, and then slowly, without turning around, said, "We need to go back with better equipment." Here's what nobody expected. It wasn't the object itself that first rattled the team. It was what lay behind it. Stretching across the ocean floor in a perfectly straight line, pointing directly at the anomaly like an accusation, was a furrow nearly 300 meters long. Deep, clean, violent. Whatever this thing was, it had not grown from the seabed. It had not drifted gently through the water column. It had plowed across the ocean floor at tremendous speed and stopped dead, like a crash landing. The ocean erases everything. This, it could not erase. That fact meant the investigation was about to go somewhere nobody on that boat was prepared to follow. Over the next several years, researchers would propose glacial deposits, meteorite impacts, Cold War military installations, and things they were reluctant to put in writing. We have these corridors. You have angles, 90-degree angles. When you say corridors, like, yeah, you have a corridor, and you have walls, flat walls. Every single explanation would be advanced with confidence. Every single explanation would collapse under the evidence. because the evidence, it turned out, was telling a completely different story. The scar that refused to heal. The Baltic seafloor is one of the most dynamic sedimentary environments on the planet. Currents shift sand constantly. Anything resting on that bed, fishing nets, anchors, even entire ship hulls, gets buried or erased within a relatively short geological window. The ocean eats traces slowly, patiently, and completely. But when Lindbergh and Osberg returned with higher resolution instruments months later, the trench was still there. Sharp-edged, deep, with crisp ridges of displaced material piled on either side, heaped at the terminus, as fresh as though it had been carved yesterday. Even though surrounding sediment patterns suggested it had been sitting there for a very, very long time. This is the part that breaks the investigation open.
Whether this is an ancient sacred temple, a crashed unidentified flying object, or an unidentified submersible object.
This was not a subtle impression left by a drifting boulder. This was a violent gouge. Something immensely heavy and moving at tremendous speed had plowed across the geology of the ocean floor and stopped dead. And the ocean, which erases everything, had failed completely to touch it. Stockholm University geologist Volker Bruchert reviewed the sonar printouts. The Gulf of Bothnia sits on one of the most stable continental shields on Earth. No active faults, no submarine volcanoes, no geological mechanism that could produce a gigantic independent mass and drag it sideways across the seabed in a perfectly straight line. A glacial deposit from the last ice age would leave chaotic, random abrasion patterns in every direction. Irregular, messy. The disorganized scratching you find everywhere glaciers have passed. Not a ruler-straight trajectory ending in precise arrest. Not a landing strip. The object displayed zero geological continuity with the floor beneath it. Nothing in the surrounding bedrock could have produced it. Nothing in the region's geological history explained how it arrived. Bruchert described it to colleagues as the most resistant data set of his career. Not because the data was ambiguous, but because it was perfectly clear, and what it clearly said was impossible. Whether this is an ancient sacred temple, a crashed unidentified flying object, or an unidentified submersible object, here's what nobody expected from this stage of the investigation. The trench itself was the second mystery. Not just the object at the end of it, the path. The 300-meter furrow was clean on both sides, with displaced material heaped symmetrically along each edge, as though something had pushed it aside deliberately rather than bulldozed through it chaotically. The geometry of the damage was too controlled. If a random mass had tumbled across the seafloor under the influence of gravity or current, you'd see irregular scoring. Wider in some places, shallower in others. Wandering. This was not that. This was a straight line, a directed event, something that moved with intention, or at least with the appearance of it. And here's the thing. If the ocean had been trying to erase that trench for centuries, possibly millennia, and had completely failed, then whatever sat at the end of it possessed a material density that defied the crushing weight of deep time. The mystery was accumulating its own gravity, and the only way forward was to get closer. If you've never gone down this rabbit hole before, subscribe right now. Because what happens next is the moment this investigation stops being about geology entirely. The dead zone. Lindbergh and Osberg returned to the coordinates with upgraded equipment, better sonar, higher resolution cameras, satellite communication gear, additional crew members, technical specialists. They were going to get a clear image of whatever sat at the end of that impossible furrow. At a safe distance, everything worked perfectly. Phones held signal. Navigation tracked clean. Sonar painted the seabed in sharp detail. System checks came back green. And then they crossed within 200 meters of the object's center. Everything died. Satellite phones dropped to zero. Navigation lights flickered and went black. The sonar screens filled with blinding white noise. The entire electronic suite collapsed simultaneously, as if someone had thrown a kill switch beneath the water. Lindbergh ordered full diagnostics. The crew cycled power on every system, swapped cables, attempted cold restarts. Nothing responded. The instruments were not broken, they were suppressed. Then, almost experimentally, they reversed course and pulled back beyond the 200-meter line. And like flipping a switch, everything came back online. Phones reconnected, cameras recorded. Sonar swept the floor with precision, as if nothing had happened. But here's the thing nobody can explain. They didn't sail away. They tested the boundary over and over. Approach, failure, retreat, restoration. Every single time they crossed that invisible threshold, total electronic collapse. Every single time they pulled back, full recovery. The pattern was mechanical, absolute, repeatable. No gradual degradation, no partial signal loss. Binary. Inside the zone, dead. Outside the zone, alive. The crew started calling it the dead zone. Bruckert, reviewing the electromagnetic data back in Stockholm, went quiet in a way his colleagues found unsettling. A rock rich in iron or magnetic minerals might nudge a compass needle. It absolutely could not kill satellite communications, drain batteries, and disable digital circuitry across a 200-meter radius. Perhaps we're going to use the AUV, the smaller ROV, to go in. Yeah, we have this big hole, like 2 meters in diameter. That kind of interference requires active energy output, not passive magnetic presence. The Ocean X crew had sailed over documented magnetic anomalies for years without losing a single radio signal. This was not that. The anomaly was not sitting passively on the seabed. It was actively rejecting observation. Every instrument humanity pointed at it went blind, and that left the expedition with a decision nobody on board wanted to make. If machines couldn't see it, human beings would have to go down and touch it themselves. Lindbergh said very little when they made that call. Osberg later admitted it was the first moment in the entire investigation that he felt something he couldn't name. Not excitement, not fear exactly. Something closer to the feeling of standing at the edge of something that doesn't have a bottom. He described looking over the side of the boat at the gray water and thinking, whatever is down there has been waiting a very long time for someone to come close enough to find out what it is. He didn't know whether that thought was comforting or not. He still doesn't. Descent into the dark. The water temperature at 90 meters in the northern Baltic hovers just above freezing. 2 degrees Celsius, cold enough to slow your thinking, cold enough to make your fingers stop responding before you notice they have stopped. Darkness at that depth is absolute. Not dim, not murky. Absolute. The kind of black where you cannot see your own hand in front of your mask. Stefan Hogerborn, Ocean X's lead diver, descended breathing a trimix gas blend. Helium, nitrogen, and oxygen calibrated to keep his brain functioning under 9 atmospheres of pressure. Every breath hissed through the regulator like static. The cold found the seams in his dry suit within minutes. At this depth, a diver's margin for error is measured in seconds. One wrong decision, and the water wins. 9 atmospheres of pressure is not an abstraction. It is the physical sensation of the world deciding to weigh more, pressing against every surface simultaneously. Nitrogen narcosis becomes a genuine threat past 30 meters without a proper gas mixture. At 90 meters without trimix, a human brain begins to malfunction in ways the diver cannot perceive. You think clearly, you make decisions confidently, and some of those decisions will kill you. Hogerborn had made dives like this before. He was not someone who frightened easily. First, they sent the ROV. The remotely operated vehicle carried powerful floodlights, the only hope of cutting through the sediment-saturated darkness. But light dies fast down here. Fine particulate matter hangs in permanent suspension like fog that never lifts, turning every beam into a milky glow that illuminates almost nothing. Visibility collapsed to roughly 1 square meter. The robot crept forward through the blackness, transmitting grainy footage frame by frame to the screens above. Every meter of progress revealed another meter of void. No scale, no reference points. Just black water and a floodlight beam dissolving into nothing. And the people above, staring at monitors, waiting for anything recognizable to appear. And then the seafloor changed. The soft mud, typical of deep ocean beds, gave way to something hard, solid, cold. The camera showed a surface unlike anything the operators had seen. Rough and deeply pitted, yet tightly cohesive. Not eroded pebble, not shattered rock. Something that had been through a furnace and come out the other side still intact. When the ROV's mechanical arm gripped a protrusion on the surface, the pressure sensors returned a hardness reading that made every operator above go completely silent, far beyond ordinary sedimentary rock. The material did not crumble, did not flake, did not yield. The surface was covered in dark, blackened patches, fine cracks running through it like pottery pulled from a kiln at 10 times the safe temperature. Certain sections looked as though they had once been fully liquid, molten, before freezing solid in a single violent instant. The ROV confirmed something real, massive, and physical. But cameras couldn't give them the full picture. The operators above watched the footage in silence. No one offered an explanation. No one reached for a theory. They had sent the robot down expecting to catalog a rock formation and come back with coordinates for a follow-up dive. What they were looking at on those monitors was not a rock formation. It was not anything they had a category for. And the only way to know what they were actually dealing with was to send a human being into 2-degree water under 9 atmospheres of pressure into absolute darkness, to put his hands on it. Hogerborn went down. The geometry that broke them. Stefan Hogerborn descended expecting a bizarre rock formation. Strange, yes, but something geology could eventually explain. He had been diving professionally for years. Volcanic formations, coral structures, mineral deposits, shipwrecks encrusted beyond recognition. He had a framework for the unusual. His framework was about to become useless. His flashlight beam swept across the thin sediment layer covering the surface, and what it illuminated made him stop swimming. He hung motionless in the water, completely still. Because what his light had just revealed was not the rounded, soft edge shape of natural erosion. It was a straight wall, perfectly vertical, rising at a precise 90-degree angle from the base. Smooth, sheer, deliberate, as if placed there with a ruler. Nature does not make right angles. Ever. Hogerborn swam along narrow corridors where parallel planes met at flawless right angles. He ran his gloved hand along one wall and followed it to its junction with another, meeting at exactly 90 degrees. He did it more than once, because the first time, he thought his perception was off. The low visibility, the cold, 9 atmospheres pressing on his skull. He did it again, same result. He pressed his palm flat against the surface, moved it slowly toward the corner, and felt the precise moment where one plane ended and another began, at a geometry that the ocean floor does not produce. In nature, water and sand always round edges over time. Always. Erosion is the story of edges becoming curves, of angles softening into slopes, of everything sharp eventually becoming smooth. No ocean current on Earth can carve a right angle into stone and preserve it for thousands of years, while the surrounding seabed constantly erodes and reshapes. The physics simply do not allow it. Yet here it was, under his hands, under his flashlight, 90 meters below the Baltic Sea. But here's the thing. He kept going. He kept swimming. Because the right angles were not even the worst of it. On the object's upper surface, a perfect circular hole surrounded by a raised square rim. A circle centered precisely within a square, like a window frame, like a reinforced hatch turned to stone. Hogerborn stopped when he saw it, pressed both gloved hands against the rim, and felt scorched stone. Hard, cold, burned, not crumbling, not yielding, utterly solid, as though whatever had tried to destroy it had failed to finish the job. His hands said geology. His eyes said construction. Those two facts could not coexist in any framework he had, any framework anyone on the team had, or any framework modern science possessed. He hung there in the black water, pressing his palms against geometry that should not exist. Later, when he tried to describe what he felt in that moment, he kept returning to the same word. Wrong. Not frightening. Not spectacular. Wrong. The wrongness of running your hand along something your instruments register as stone, your training registers as stone, but your brain refuses to process as anything stone could naturally become. The answer to why it felt wrong was waiting in a laboratory in Stockholm, and it was going to make everything worse. The impossible material samples chiseled from those walls and frame-like structures were hauled to the surface and shipped to Brukert's lab at Stockholm University. The hope was simple. Identify the material and let geology close the case. Bruckert placed the first sample under the microscope and leaned in. He identified basalt. Not just any basalt. Basalt with a crystal structure that told a story of exposure to extreme temperatures, thousands of degrees, followed by rapid, almost instantaneous cooling. He sat back from the scope, picked up the sample in his bare hand, turned it over slowly in the light, felt the texture, dense, fine-grained. Nothing like the sedimentary material that should be the only thing down there. Set it down, picked up his notes, set them down. He had been a geologist for decades. He had looked at thousands of samples from dozens of countries. He called a colleague into the lab, pointed at the scope, and said nothing. The colleague looked, adjusted the focus, looked again, also said nothing. They both understood what basalt in the Baltic meant. Or rather, they understood that it meant something had gone very wrong with their understanding of this region's entire geological history. Here's the thing nobody can explain. The Baltic Sea rests on one of the most ancient and stable continental shields on the planet. No volcanic activity has occurred in this region for tens of millions of years. No lava source, no magma chamber, no thermal vent of any kind. Finding basalt in the Baltic seafloor is like finding a fresh lava field in Antarctica. It does not belong there. Under the electron microscope, the crystal structure confirmed it. The rock had once been fully molten and then chilled so rapidly that the crystals never had time to grow. fine, stunted, frozen mid-formation. The kind of thermal shock profile you find in materials exposed to furnace-level or re-entry-level heat, and then quenched immediately in cold water. Bruckert had seen nothing like it, not once in his entire career. And this is the part that breaks the investigation completely. He considered a meteorite impact. A space rock striking the seabed at hypersonic speed could theoretically generate enough heat to produce basalt-like material. He pursued that hypothesis carefully and watched it collapse the instant he compared the thermal data to the geometric evidence Hogerborn brought back. A meteorite striking at hypersonic speed explodes on impact. It shatters, melts, fuses into a chaotic, glassy, structureless mass. Every meteorite impact site ever studied shows the same result: total structural destruction. No meteorite in recorded science has ever settled gently and left behind square corridors, vertical walls, and perfectly circular frames intact. Two completely irreconcilable sets of facts cornered in the same room. The material screamed uncontrolled volcanic heat. The shape screamed deliberate engineering. No natural process on Earth can produce both simultaneously. Modern science has no name, no classification, no category for an object that is geological and architectural at the same time. Bruckert stared at those two data sets for a long time. There was only one exit from the evidence, and he didn't want to walk through it. But the evidence didn't give him a choice. The corpse of technology. We are not looking at a rock. We are not looking at a meteorite. We are looking at a corpse. The corpse of technology. An artifact of engineering so ancient that time, heat, and unimaginable pressure have turned it into something nearly unrecognizable as anything other than stone. The object on the Baltic seafloor is physical evidence of an artificial structure. A machine, a vehicle, a construction of some kind that endured a catastrophic energy event of almost inconceivable force and was petrified by it. Whatever material once comprised its outer surface was subjected to temperatures so extreme that it fused with surrounding sediment and underwent total molecular transformation. The organic chemistry of the original material was annihilated. What replaced it was basalt. The heat turned technology into geology. The right angles Hogerborn touched with his own hands. The straight walls. The circular frame centered within a square rim. These are not natural formations. They are the surviving skeleton of a designed object sealed inside an eternal shell of stone. Like a fossil preserves the shape of a living creature long after the creature's soft tissue has been replaced by mineral. The Baltic anomaly preserves the geometry of something built, long after the material it was built from ceased to exist. The blueprint survived. The body did not. And what that means for everything else on the ocean floor, that question is the one that keeps investigators awake. Consider what that means, very carefully. We are not talking about an alien spacecraft in the science fiction sense. We are not talking about anything that requires abandoning the scientific method. We are talking about what the physical evidence actually says. That an object with engineered geometry and volcanic thermal signature exists in a location where neither engineered geometry nor volcanic thermal signature has any business existing. The evidence points to one conclusion, not because the investigators wanted it to, because every other explanation was tested and eliminated. What remained, however improbable, is what the data describes. What the ocean is still hiding. The real terror is not that one impossible object is sitting at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. The real terror is what it implies about everything else we have already cataloged. If evidence of an advanced technological presence can sit on the seafloor for thousands of years, disguised as ordinary geology, surviving sonar sweeps, geological surveys, peer-reviewed analysis, and the entire observational apparatus of modern science, then the category of things we know needs to be re-examined from the beginning. Not just the ocean floor, the entire geological record, every survey that has been run, every sample that has been analyzed, every formation that has been photographed and filed away as unremarkable. All of it sits on the assumption that we know what engineered material looks like after catastrophic thermal transformation. We did not know that. The Baltic anomaly is the first piece of evidence that forced us to confront what we were missing. We have been searching for gleaming metal and flashing signals. We have been hunting for the obvious. But what if the most extreme technological events don't leave behind recognizable artifacts? What if they leave behind geology? What if the heat is so total, the transformation so complete, that there is nothing left to recognize? Only scorched stone bearing the faint geometric imprint of something that was once designed. Misidentified by every instrument we point at it, and filed under a category that doesn't apply. Every sonar sweep that has passed over an unusual rock formation. Every strange return that got noted and filed. Every anomalous basalt deposit in a region with no volcanic history. Every disc-shaped mass that a survey team photographed, labeled as an irregular geological feature, logged in a database, and moved on from without a second thought. We have no idea how many we have already found. We have no idea how many are sitting in marine survey databases right now, cross-referenced with nothing, flagged by no one, filed under a label that doesn't fit, waiting for someone to ask the question Lindbergh couldn't stop asking after June 19, 2011. We have no idea how many we are sailing over right now. That is not a rhetorical question. It is the only honest answer the evidence allows. Drop your answer in the comments and subscribe. Because the Baltic Sea anomaly is one investigation that is nowhere near over.